My son-in-law thought I was just a frail old man who never noticed anything. He crept into my room while he believed I was fast asleep, pulling open the drawer to snatch the safe key. But what he found inside froze his blood. His face went pale, and in that moment, he realized I was not the easy target he thought. And me? I just lay there in the darkness, smiling. Before I continue, make sure to subscribe and tell me in the comments, what would you do if your son-in-law tried to rob you under your own roof? When my daughter Emily called me that Tuesday morning, I could tell something was wrong from the moment I heard her voice. She had always been strong-willed, never one to ask for help easily. So when she cleared her throat and said, "Dad, can we come stay with you for a little while?" I knew this was more than just a casual request. She went on to explain that Mark, her husband, had lost his job unexpectedly. The bills were piling up, the mortgage was already 3 months behind, and they were drowning. I had always told Emily that no matter what, my home was her home too. Of course, I told her to pack up and come immediately. She sounded both relieved and embarrassed, apologizing again and again for imposing. But I brushed it off. She was my daughter. She did not need to apologize for leaning on her father in hard times. 2 days later, a moving truck pulled into my driveway. Emily jumped out first, her face tired but smiling, and she threw her arms around me. She clung to me in a way she had not done since she was a teenager, whispering thank you into my shoulder. Behind her, Mark stepped out of the truck. His handshake was firm but quick, his eyes restless as they darted around my front yard, then over the house itself like he was appraising it. "Nice place, Richard," he said, stepping inside as if he owned the place. "Must be worth quite a bit now." His tone struck me as odd. Not a comment of admiration, but more of an assessment. Still, I let it slide. They were under pressure, and stress makes people act strangely. I helped them carry boxes into the guest room down the hall from my bedroom. Emily settled in quickly, happy to be back in the house she had grown up in. But Mark seemed uneasy, too watchful. He asked me a dozen small questions about the house. Did the neighborhood have a security watch? Did I keep spare keys hidden anywhere outside? Did the neighbors travel often? At first, I chalked it up to him adjusting to a new environment. But something about the frequency and persistence of those questions sat wrong with me. We began a routine. I cooked dinner every night, and Emily helped with cleanup while Mark spent a lot of time on his phone in the living room. He claimed he was sending out resumes and making networking calls. But I noticed how often those calls were taken outside, away from listening ears. Whenever he came back in, his expression was tense, his jaw set like a man carrying a burden he could not shake. I wanted to believe it was just stress from unemployment, but a small part of me wondered if there was more to it. The first real red flag came one evening during dinner. We were sitting at the table, a simple meal of roast chicken and vegetables, when Mark suddenly looked at me and asked, "So, Richard, that safe of yours upstairs, what kind of lock does it have?" The fork paused halfway to my mouth. Emily nearly choked on her water. "Mark, what kind of question is that?" she said quickly, trying to laugh it off. But Mark's eyes stayed locked on mine, waiting for an answer. His face carried that same polite smile he always used, but his eyes had something predatory in them that made my stomach tighten. I set down my fork carefully and asked, "What safe are you talking about?" "Oh, come on," he said with a little laugh. "Every man your age has a safe. With all the break-ins happening lately, you must keep one, right?" Important documents, maybe some cash. There have not been any break-ins around here, I said flatly. I had lived in Maplewood for 20 years, and the worst that had happened was Mrs. Whitaker's dog getting loose last summer. Mark waved his hand dismissively. Well, maybe not that you hear about. People keep these things quiet. No need to panic the neighbors. I just think a man living alone in a house this size has to have some serious security measures. Emily shifted uncomfortably in her chair. Dad always keeps things locked up. He's careful. Right. But what about insurance? Mark pressed. If something happened to you, Emily would need to know where everything important is kept. It would be irresponsible not to plan for that. The words landed like a weight. It was not just idle curiosity. He had spoken about my hypothetical death so casually, so smoothly, and I noticed how his pupils dilated slightly as he said it. I stayed calm, forcing a small smile. I have everything organized. Emily knows what she needs to know. Mark leaned forward, his elbows on the table, his smile stretching wider. But does she know about the key? The air grew heavier in the room. Emily blinked in confusion. What key? She asked. My hand tightened on my water glass. And how exactly would you know about any key in my room? The words came out sharper than I intended. For just a flicker of a second, Mark's mask slipped, and I saw something cold behind his polite facade. Then it was gone. He leaned back casually and said, Last week, when I had that headache, I was looking for aspirin. Emily told me to check your bathroom cabinet, but I must have opened the wrong drawer first, saw a key taped inside. Sorry, I did not mean to snoop. Emily nodded quickly. I remember that. You were miserable that night. But I remembered it differently. Mark had disappeared upstairs for almost 30 minutes after dinner that night. He had excused himself, claiming stomach troubles. That was far too long to be searching for aspirin. I kept my tone calm. The aspirin has always been in the bathroom cabinet. There is no reason to search my bedroom. Mark's jaw tightened ever so slightly before he forced a smile. I must have been out of it. Pain does that. The rest of the meal passed with forced small talk. But Mark's questions never truly stopped. He circled back again and again, slipping in queries about my banking habits, whether I kept emergency cash, who else had access to my house. Each one felt like probing fingers pressing against the edges of my patience. I answered sparingly and filed every word away in my memory. Later that night, after dinner was cleaned up and Emily and Mark had gone upstairs to their guest room, I lingered in the kitchen with the dishes. I went through the motions of scrubbing, rinsing, and drying, but my mind was replaying every moment of Mark's questions, every glance, every slip in his mask. Something was not right. His unemployment story had never fully added up. His interest in my financial habits had grown too obvious, and now this fixation on a key that he should not even know existed. When I finally finished and turned off the kitchen lights, the house felt different. It no longer felt like the quiet, safe place it had always been. Instead, it felt exposed, fragile, as if the walls themselves knew a storm was coming. I climbed the stairs slowly, the wooden steps creaking beneath my weight. At the top, I reached for the banister, as I always did. Then I stopped dead in my tracks. My bedroom door was open 2 inches, a narrow sliver of darkness showing through the gap. I never left my bedroom door ajar. I always closed it completely, a habit built from decades of living alone. When I had gone downstairs for dinner, the door had been shut. Now, it was not. I froze at the top of the stairs, staring at my half-open bedroom door, knowing I had closed it before dinner. The sight made my chest tighten, as if invisible fingers were pressing down on me. Slowly, I pushed the door open with the palm of my hand, careful not to make a sound, and stepped inside. At first glance, everything seemed normal. The bed was still neatly made, the lamp sat on the nightstand where I had left it, and the blinds were half drawn as they had been that morning. But decades of living alone had trained my eyes to spot small details. My closet door hung slightly open by 4 inches, just enough to irritate me. I always closed it completely, always. I moved further in, scanning the dresser. My second drawer was not quite flush. The small gap between the wood and the frame betrayed what had happened. Slowly, I pulled it open. Inside were files and documents that I kept meticulously organized. But now, the order was wrong. Folders that belonged in the back were jumbled near the front. Insurance papers had been shuffled among bank statements. My will, which I always kept tucked in the farthest folder, was sitting near the front. Someone had gone through my belongings. Then my hand reached under the lip of the drawer where I had taped a small brass key years ago. My fingers brushed only smooth wood. I pressed harder, feeling along the surface. Nothing. The key was gone. A cold rush of anger surged through me. That key was the manual override for my safe. It was not just some trinket. It was the one thing I never wanted in the wrong hands. And now, it was in Mark's hands. I stood there, fists trembling, my pulse pounding in my ears. For a moment, I wanted to storm into the guest room and drag him out by the collar, demand an explanation. But then I forced myself to breathe. I had spent 30 years as an insurance investigator before retirement. I had dealt with thieves, liars, and con artists. I knew better than to confront someone unprepared. Anger only clouded judgment. If Mark had taken the key, he believed I was too naive to notice. That arrogance was his weakness. If I let him keep thinking I was oblivious, I could turn his plan against him. So I closed the drawer carefully, smoothing everything back into place, and turned off the bedroom light. I changed into sleep clothes, brushing my teeth as if nothing were wrong. But every move I made felt like a performance for an invisible audience. I slipped into bed, but sleep never came. My body lay still, but my mind was racing, cataloging every detail. Mark had been upstairs earlier that night, asking about safes, about insurance, about my death. Now the key was gone. His plan was taking shape. At 11:52 p.m., according to the clock on my nightstand, I heard it. Soft footsteps downstairs, heavier than Emily's light step, deliberate, careful. I held my breath. Through the thin floorboards of the old house, sound traveled strangely. Then I heard a voice, muffled but clear enough to recognize. Mark. "Yeah, it's me," he whispered. "Everyone's asleep." My stomach dropped. He was on the phone. Slowly, I swung my legs out of bed, moving silently across the floor until I reached the heating vent. The ductwork in this house had always carried sound in unexpected ways, and now it worked in my favor. Mark's voice drifted up, sharper, more confident than I had ever heard it at the dinner table. "The old man's definitely loaded," he said. "I found bank statements, investment portfolios, everything. Serious money. We're talking more than enough to clear what I owe, and then some." My blood ran cold. He was not acting alone. "Tomorrow night is perfect," Mark continued. "Emily goes to her book club every Tuesday, 7 to 9. Gives us a clean window." I pressed my ear closer to the vent, my hands clammy. "I already have the safe key," he bragged. "Took it earlier while they were at dinner. He keeps everything important in there. Cash, jewelry, documents. It's all there." I clenched my jaw, forcing myself to stay silent. He thought he had me figured out. Thought I was too old and too trusting to notice. But every word he spoke gave me more ammunition. Then his tone shifted, raw desperation creeping in. Look, I know the timeline's tight, but I don't have a choice. Those guys want their money now. My gambling debts are not going away, and they're not patient. You know what happens if I don't pay. Gambling debts. It all clicked. The secrecy, the restless calls, the constant questions about my money. This was not about unemployment. This was about covering the consequences of his own reckless choices. And worse, he was using Emily as a shield, planning to exploit her trust while destroying the father who had opened his home. I'll tell her we got a job offer in another state. He whispered. Something urgent. We'll be gone by Thursday before the old fool even knows what hit him. The venom in his voice stung more than the words. Old fool. He thought of me as nothing more than an obstacle to remove. Rage surged in me, hot and consuming, but I held it down. I could not afford to make a single sound. Instead, I reached for my phone on the nightstand, opened the voice recording app, and positioned it near the vent. The screen glowed faintly, and I pressed record. Trust me, Mark said, his voice almost smug. He'll never suspect family. Even if he notices something's missing, Emily will convince him he just misplaced it. You know how old people get. The contempt in his words nearly made me stand and storm downstairs. But I stayed frozen in place. I needed proof. I needed his own voice to condemn him. By Thursday, we're out of here, Mark said firmly. He'll be sitting here clueless while we're long gone. That was the final confirmation I needed. Hands trembling, I hit record on my phone just as Mark revealed his plan to rob me the next night. I stayed there in the dark, barely breathing, until his footsteps faded away and the living room fell silent again. Eventually, I heard him creep back up the stairs and slip into the guest room with Emily, his voice suddenly soft, like he had never spoken those venomous words. I lay in bed wide awake, clutching my phone under the pillow. My heart thudded in my chest, not from fear, but from fury and determination. He thought he was clever. He thought I was blind. But now I had his words preserved, his intent sealed in a recording. The only question was what I was going to do with it. As I lay there in the darkness, I thought back to the morning this all started, the call that had pulled me out of my quiet routine. Emily's voice had been strained that day, breaking in a way that made me want to drive to her house immediately and bring her home. She had always been proud, maybe too proud. She hated asking for help, even as a child. So when she called and admitted that she and Mark were 3 months behind on the mortgage, I knew things were worse than she was saying. I asked her how far behind they really were. And she paused before whispering, 3 months. Dad, we can't keep up. The relief that poured out of her when I told her they could move in was heartbreaking. She thanked me over and over, her voice cracking. I told her not to worry. Of course, she could come home. But even in that first conversation, something about Mark's situation did not sit right with me. He had supposedly worked 8 steady years at his company, with good reviews, and then, out of nowhere, he lost his job. Emily said the layoffs had been sudden, but when I asked her for more details, she said Mark was handling it all and she trusted him. I let it go because I wanted to believe she was safe with him. 3 days later, they pulled up in that moving truck. Emily's hug that day had been pure gratitude, but Mark's demeanor had been completely different. He walked through my house with an intensity that should have alarmed me right then and there. His eyes were not looking at the family photos or the cozy kitchen where Emily had grown up. They were measuring, His first comment was not about how thankful he was, but about how much my house must be worth in today's market. I had ignored it, convincing myself it was idle chatter. Now, lying in bed with a recording of his betrayal still fresh, I realized it had been the first test, his first attempt to see what I might reveal. Over the following weeks, more signs should have clued me in. Mark had offered to drive me to the bank once, saying he needed to update his address with unemployment. At the time, I thought it was considerate. But looking back, I saw how he had lingered at the teller window, watching closely as I made my deposit. He had asked casual questions about my account types and whether I had a safety deposit box. I had brushed it off as curiosity. He had also asked me which neighbors were home during the day, how often I left the house, even whether I carried cash. All those questions, all those little intrusions, I had explained away because Emily trusted him and I wanted to support her marriage. But now it was clear. He had been building a map of my life, cataloging my vulnerabilities, setting the stage for the theft he was planning. I rolled over in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the old house creak as it always did at night. If I went to the police right now, I had his words recorded, enough to raise suspicion. But what would that do to Emily? What would it do to her marriage? She would be caught in the middle, torn between believing her father and her husband. I could not let her discover the truth in a way that left her doubting. No, I needed more. I needed undeniable proof. Proof so clear that even Emily, with all her love for him, could not look away. By the time the sun rose, my plan was already taking shape. I brewed my morning coffee as I always did, moving through my routine so that Emily and Mark would see nothing unusual. Emily came into the kitchen in her robe, kissed my cheek, and thanked me again for letting them stay. Mark came in 20 minutes later, his hair damp, his eyes sharper than ever. He smiled at me like nothing had happened, like he had not plotted my robbery hours earlier. I smiled back, forcing my face into a mask of calm. Inside, my resolve hardened. After breakfast, I told them I had errands to run. I drove straight to the hardware store, parking in the far corner of the lot and sitting for a moment to steady myself. For years, I had handled cases of fraud, theft, staged accidents. I had seen desperate people do terrible things for money. But I had never thought my own family would drag me into that world. Inside the store, I picked up a few items for appearances, light bulbs, batteries, small tools, things I could claim as household supplies if asked. But my real stop was the party supplies aisle. There, I found what I needed, a spring-loaded confetti cannon, designed for celebrations, harmless but spectacular. Along with it, I grabbed a bag of ultrafine glitter in silver and gold, the kind that sticks to everything and never fully washes off. If Mark wanted to play thief, he was going to get a surprise he would never forget. Back home, I waited until they left for grocery shopping together. The note Emily left on the counter said they would be gone until 2. That gave me 3 full hours. Down in my basement workshop, I dismantled the cannon. The mechanism was simple, a spring-loaded plunger. I carefully replaced the paper confetti with my glitter mixture, making sure it would spray directly outward when triggered. I tested the device with a wooden spoon, adjusting the sensitivity until it went off only when someone reached deep into the drawer. The result was perfect, a sudden burst of shimmering chaos that coated everything in its path. Upstairs, I set the trap. I chose the very drawer where Mark had already searched and where he expected the safe key to be. I taped a dummy key near the front, an old luggage key similar in size and shape. If he spotted it, he would reach in quickly. confident he had found his prize. And in that moment, he would trigger the cannon. The glitter would cover his hands, his face, his clothes. There would be no hiding it. He would be caught in the act, glowing like a beacon of guilt. I stepped back and studied the drawer. It looked ordinary enough, the kind of place an old man might keep miscellaneous odds and ends. Nothing suspicious. I closed it gently and allowed myself a small smile. But the trap alone was not enough. I needed more than a glitter explosion to prove his intent. I needed to capture his actions, his face, his voice, all at once. So later that afternoon, I drove to the electronics store. A young clerk helped me select a small wireless camera with night vision and motion detection. It was discreet, smaller than a deck of cards, and linked directly to an app on my phone. I paid cash and took it home. That night, while Emily and Mark sat in the living room, watching television, I excused myself, claiming I was tired. In my bedroom, I set up the camera. At first, I tried the bookshelf, but the angle was wrong. Then I tried behind the lamp, but it was too obvious. Finally, I found the perfect position, tucked between books on my nightstand, angled toward the dresser. From there, it captured both the drawer and the center of the room. Hidden in plain sight, it was invisible unless someone was specifically searching for it. I tested the feed on my phone. The night vision was crystal clear. The microphone picked up sound without distortion. If Mark muttered a single incriminating word while rifling through my things, I would have it. I adjusted a few more settings, switched it to motion-activated recording, and checked the view one last time. When I checked the camera feed on my phone, the night vision showed my dresser perfectly. The trap was armed, and Mark had no idea. That little image glowing on my screen was all I needed to calm my nerves. For the first time in weeks, I felt I had shifted the balance of power. Mark thought he was the hunter, but he had walked straight into a snare of his own making. All I had to do now was play my part. The following evening began with an air of forced normalcy. Emily was cheerful, talking about her book club and her plans to help out at the community library. I busied myself with cooking, falling back on my familiar routines, the clatter of pans and smell of roasting chicken helping me focus. Mark joined us at the table with his usual mask of politeness, his smile practiced, his words pleasant. But I watched the way his eyes lingered on me. There was calculation in his gaze, the kind of sharpness I had seen in fraud cases long ago. He was measuring me, testing how easily I could be led, how deeply I could be lulled. We sat down, and for the first 20 minutes, everything was cordial. Emily chatted with genuine warmth, and I responded in kind. But I could feel Mark's impatience simmering beneath the surface. Then, as Emily reached for a second helping, he leaned back in his chair, his smile tightening. "Richard, I was thinking," he said casually, "why don't we have a drink together after dinner? A little father and son-in-law bonding time." Emily looked up, surprised. "That sounds nice," she said, glancing between us. I kept my expression neutral, though my stomach turned cold. A drink. The timing was no coincidence. "I appreciate the offer, Mark," I said carefully, "but I really shouldn't. My doctor has me on blood pressure medication. Alcohol does not mix well with it." Mark's smile did not falter, but a tiny muscle near his jaw twitched. "One small glass won't hurt, just a toast." Emily frowned slightly. "Mark, if Dad says no, respect that." But he leaned forward, pushing again, his tone just a bit too insistent. "Come on, Richard, just a splash. It would mean a lot to me." I nodded slowly, playing along, though inside I felt a surge of disgust. He was not asking out of affection. He was hoping I would swallow whatever he slipped into that glass, some powder or liquid that would make me sleep heavily through the night. It was the perfect cover for his scheme. But he had underestimated me. "Tell you what," I said with a sigh. "Pour yourself something and we can sit together for a bit. I'll raise an empty glass in spirit." Reluctantly, he stood, heading to the kitchen. I listened to the clink of bottles and glasses, the pause as if he were measuring carefully. When he returned, he set 2 tumblers down, one full, one nearly empty. Amber liquid glowed in both. He held one out to me. "Barely a teaspoon," he said. "Just a sip." I looked him in the eye, then at the glass, then back at him. I forced a weary smile and shook my head. "Not tonight, Mark. I am more tired than I thought. I'll take my sleeping pill instead." For the first time, relief flickered across his face, quick and unguarded. He nodded quickly. "That's smart. You need your rest." Emily reached over to squeeze my hand. "Get some sleep, Dad. We'll handle the cleanup." I stood slowly, making a show of rubbing my temples and leaning on the table. I let my shoulders sag just a little, dragging my feet as I left the room, performing the part of a weary old man weighed down by age. But inside, my mind was sharp and electric. Every step was deliberate. Every sigh was a calculated piece of theater. Mark needed to believe I would be unconscious soon, dead to the world with the help of medication. Upstairs, I brushed my teeth, changed into night clothes, and even set out a pill bottle on the nightstand. I slipped one into my hand and palmed it, pretending to swallow with a gulp of water. If Mark or Emily peeked in, the performance would be convincing. Then I pulled back the covers and lay down, my body still, my breathing slow and heavy, as if sleep had already claimed me. The house settled into silence. From the faint sounds below, I heard the television switch on. Emily's laugh drifted up once or twice, light and unaware of the storm brewing. Mark's voice was lower, measured, but I caught the occasional edge of irritation when Emily interrupted him. Eventually, I heard her footsteps on the stairs, the creak of the guest room door, and then quiet. Mark remained downstairs. He was waiting. I kept perfectly still. My phone rested under my pillow, connected to the hidden camera. A faint glow let me know the feed was active. The image on the screen showed my dresser, silent and waiting. The trap was ready. My pulse thrummed in my ears as the minutes dragged by. Midnight came and went. At 1, the television clicked off. Silence stretched out across the house, heavy and tense. At 2:41 a.m., it happened. The first creak of the stairs, soft and deliberate, floated up to me. Each step was taken with practiced care, as though he had memorized which boards groaned under pressure. My breath slowed, steady and deep, the rhythm of a man in drugged slumber. Inside, every muscle coiled tight, but I forced myself to remain still. The floorboard outside my room whispered under his weight. Then silence. He was listening, testing, making sure the pill had done its work. I felt the faintest draft as my bedroom door eased open, inch by inch. Through my barely closed eyes, I saw the shadow stretch into the room, tall and hunched with intent. He stood there, watching me, counting the rise and fall of my chest. Satisfied, he moved with the stealth of a predator, his dark clothing blending into the night. He thought I was helpless, thought he owned this moment. But he was walking into the snare I had built with my own hands. I kept my breathing slow and steady, chest rising and falling like a man deep in medicated sleep. Through my barely open eyes, I could see the faint silhouette move across my room. Mark slipped inside like a shadow, careful and deliberate, his movements smooth as if he had rehearsed them. He closed the door behind him without a sound, leaving only the faint glow of the hallway nightlight filtering under the crack. I could not see his face clearly, but I could feel his presence. The air seemed heavier, as though the house itself knew something unnatural was happening. He paused for a long moment at the foot of my bed. I felt his eyes on me, weighing my stillness, testing my performance. My body itched to move, to confront him, but I stayed frozen, heart pounding so hard I worried he might hear it. After a minute, his confidence seemed to return. He turned from the bed and padded softly toward the dresser. My phone beneath the pillow buzzed faintly as the hidden camera activated. The motion detection had picked him up. On my screen, though hidden from his view, the night vision captured him perfectly. A dark figure approaching the dresser, hands reaching for the second drawer. This was it. He crouched slightly, pulling the drawer open with the precision of a man who had planned every step. For a split second, his posture radiated triumph. He reached toward the front, where the dummy key waited, shiny enough to draw the eye, ordinary enough to pass as the real thing. His hand plunged inside, his fingers curling around the bait. That was when the cannon fired. The sound was startlingly loud in the still night, a sudden pop like a firecracker. Then came the explosion, a violent burst of silver and gold glitter erupting outward in a spectacular cloud. The particles filled the air like a shimmering storm, coating Mark's hands, his face, his clothes. He staggered backward, coughing and cursing, swiping at the glitter that clung to him like a second skin. His dark shirt now blazed under the faint light, every speck catching and reflecting like 1,000 accusing eyes. "What the hell?" he hissed, brushing frantically at his chest. But there was no brushing it away. The ultrafine glitter stuck to his skin, his hair, his eyebrows. He looked like a man caught in a celebration he never wanted, transformed into a walking beacon of guilt. I sat up slowly, feigning startled confusion. What in God's name is going on? My voice cracked as if I had just woken from a heavy sleep. I reached for the lamp and flicked it on. Light flooded the room, and the sight before me was even more incredible than I had imagined. Mark froze in place, his eyes wide, his hand still clutching the dummy key. Glitter cascaded from his hair in tiny waterfalls, drifting onto the carpet like festive snow. He looked utterly ridiculous, like a Christmas ornament gone wrong. His mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. "Mark?" I asked, blinking as though I could not believe what I was seeing. "What on earth are you doing in my bedroom at this hour?" he stammered, his voice uneven. I heard a noise. I thought someone was breaking in." "Breaking in?" I repeated, glancing deliberately at the open dresser drawer, the glitter coating him head to toe. "And that led you to my drawer? At 3 a.m? Before he could fumble for another excuse, footsteps thudded in the hallway. Emily's voice rang out, worried and alert. "Dad, what happened?" The door swung open, and she stepped in, tightening her robe around her. She stopped dead in the doorway, her eyes going wide at the sight of her husband glowing with golden dust, holding a key that did not belong to him, standing in my bedroom like a guilty child caught with his hand in the cookie jar. "What in the world?" Emily's voice cracked with disbelief. "Mark, why are you covered in glitter? What were you doing in Dad's room?" Mark's face twisted in panic. He tried brushing at his clothes again, but the glitter only smeared, sticking to his hands like glue. "It's not what it looks like," he stammered. Emily stepped further into the room, her eyes narrowing. "Not what it looks like? You're standing here in the middle of the night, covered in sparkles, holding a key, and Dad's drawer is open. Explain that to me." I was looking for something to help you sleep," he blurted. "You were restless, remember? I thought maybe he had some medicine up here." "My medicine has always been in the bathroom cabinet," I said calmly, my tone sharper now. "You knew that. Everyone knows that." Emily looked at me, then at Mark, then back again. Her face shifted, confusion giving way to dawning realization. "Mark," she said slowly, her voice trembling, "why would you be searching Dad's dresser for medicine? And why are you holding a key?" Mark's mouth opened, but no sound came out. He looked like a cornered animal, glitter shining off his skin like evidence he could never erase. He dropped the dummy key onto the floor with a clink, as if letting go of it could somehow erase the truth. "Emily, I can explain," he said finally, desperation creeping into his voice. "No," she said firmly, her tone sharper than I had ever heard from her. "You will explain right now, because from where I'm standing, it looks like you were trying to rob my father." He took a step toward her, hands outstretched, glitter raining from his fingertips. "Emily, please, you don't understand. I was just—" "Stop." She cut him off, her eyes blazing. "Don't you dare come closer to me." The room hung in silence, thick and heavy. Mark's breathing was ragged, his chest heaving with panic. Emily's face was pale, her hands trembling, but her eyes stayed locked on him with a fierceness I had never seen. She looked less like a confused wife and more like a daughter realizing she had to defend her family. I rose from the bed, my voice calm but steady. "Emily," I said, my eyes fixed on Mark, "there's something you need to hear." Her head snapped toward me. "What do you mean?" I reached for my phone on the nightstand, my thumb brushing across the screen to pull up the recording. The proof I had captured the night before was waiting, damning in every word. "Your husband has not been honest with you," I said quietly, "and I have the evidence." Mark's face drained of color beneath the glitter. His mouth opened in protest, but no sound came out. He looked at the phone in my hand like it was a weapon, which in many ways it was. Emily's eyes widened, her breath catching in her throat. "Evidence?" she whispered. "What are you talking about, Dad?" I held her gaze steadily, the phone glowing faintly in my palm. "It's time you knew exactly what Mark has been planning." The words hung in the room like smoke, thick and suffocating. Emily's eyes darted from me to her husband, then back again. Mark's glitter-streaked face twisted in desperation, his lips forming silent protests. But I did not give him the chance to speak. I unlocked my phone and pressed play. At first, only the faint hum of background noise filtered through. Then Mark's own voice cut in, clear and sharp as glass. "Yeah, it's me. Everyone's asleep. The old man's definitely loaded. I found bank statements, investment portfolios, the whole thing. We're talking serious money here." Emily's face went white, her mouth falling open. She turned slowly toward Mark, who had gone completely still. His eyes widened, then narrowed, as though he had been struck across the face. "Emily," he blurted, his voice cracking, "it's not what it sounds like." I held up a hand, silencing him. "Listen." The recording continued, Mark's voice dripping with arrogance. "Tomorrow night's perfect. Emily goes to her book club every Tuesday, 7 to 9. Gives us the perfect window. I already have the safe key. Grabbed it earlier today while they were at dinner. The old fool keeps everything important in there. Cash, jewelry, probably more bank information. Emily's hands flew to her mouth, her eyes filling with tears. "Mark," she whispered. Horror etched across her face. You took his key?" "Emily, stop," Mark said quickly, stepping toward her. His glitter-coated hand reached out, but she pulled back like his touch was poison. "No," she snapped, her voice rising with a sharpness I had never heard from her. "You don't get to talk. You don't get to lie. That's your voice. That's you." On the recording, his words kept pouring out, damning with every sentence. "Look, I know the timeline's tight, but my gambling debts aren't going away. Those guys aren't patient. If I don't pay them soon, you know what happens. This has to happen now." "Gambling debts?" Emily's voice cracked as she repeated the words. "What gambling debts?" Mark's face tightened, sweat beading on his forehead, even as glitter sparkled on his skin. "Emily, listen to me. It's complicated." "Complicated?" she shot back. "You lied to me for months. You lost your job, and instead of telling me the truth, you gambled everything away? And then you planned to rob my father, the one person who opened his home to us?" The recording played on, relentless. David's just some lonely old widower, grateful for company. He has no idea what's coming. He'll never suspect family. Even if he notices something's missing, Emily will convince him he misplaced it. You know how old people are with their memory. Emily's body shook as tears rolled down her face. She looked at me, stricken. "Dad, he called you a fool. He was going to use me to cover his theft. He was going to make me lie for him." Mark's face contorted, his mask cracking into something harsher. "That's not fair," he shouted. "You don't understand the pressure I'm under. You don't know what it's like to have people breathing down your neck, threatening you if you can't pay up. I didn't have a choice." "No choice?" Emily's voice was a knife. "You had every choice. You could have told me. You could have asked my father for help. Instead, you plotted behind our backs and treated him like prey." He tried to step closer, but she raised her hands defensively, fire in her eyes. "Stay away from me, Mark." The recording ended, leaving the room in suffocating silence. Only the faint sound of glitter sliding off Mark's clothes punctuated the air. Emily's shoulders shook as she wiped her tears roughly. "How much?" she demanded suddenly. "What?" Mark stammered. "How much do you owe?" she pressed, her voice sharp with rage. He hesitated, his jaw working as if searching for a softer answer. But under her burning stare, he broke. 47,000, he muttered, barely audible. Emily let out a strangled laugh, part disbelief, part despair. 47,000? You buried us in debt, dragged me into your lies, and now you're standing in my father's bedroom trying to rob him, and you think this is something I'll forgive? Mark's face twisted. "I was trying to protect you." "Protect me?" she screamed, her voice cracking. "By using me as your alibi? By making me believe my father was losing his memory while you robbed him blind?" The tears in her eyes hardened into something else. Fury. She jabbed a trembling finger at the door. "Get out!" Mark blinked, stunned. "What?" "You heard me," Emily said, her voice firm despite the tears running down her face. "Get out of my father's house." "No," Mark said firmly, desperation creeping back. "I'm your husband. We're married. You don't just throw me out over a mistake." "This wasn't a mistake," I cut in, my voice calm but unyielding. "This was a crime, a premeditated betrayal. You were ready to leave with my daughter in 48 hours and vanish, leaving me robbed and humiliated." Mark spun toward me, his voice rising in anger. "You turned her against me." "No," Emily said sharply, stepping in front of me. "You did that yourself." The second you chose to lie, the second you decided to use me as cover, the second you stood in this room dripping with glitter and lies. Mark's chest heaved, his fists clenching at his sides. He looked from me to Emily, his face pale, his glitter-coated body trembling with rage. "This isn't finished," he growled. "Half of everything we own is mine. You can't just throw me out like trash." Emily's lip curled. "What half? All we have is debt. Your gambling debt. And I am done carrying it." Mark's eyes darted toward me again, blazing with hatred. "This is your fault, old man. If you hadn't interfered—" "Enough!" Emily's voice cracked like a whip. She pointed at the door, her hand steady even as she shook with emotion. "Pack your things, Mark. Get out of my father's house." Emily's voice was steel, sharp enough to cut through the tension that had choked the room. For a long moment, Mark just stood there, trembling, his glitter-coated hands hanging uselessly at his sides. He looked like a man who had stepped on stage expecting applause, and instead found himself booed into silence. Then his face hardened. Without another word, he stormed toward the guest room, every step leaving a faint trail of glitter behind him, like a breadcrumb path of guilt. Emily and I stood together in the doorway of my bedroom, listening as drawers slammed and bags were stuffed in angry haste. The sound of hangers clattering against each other, the dull thud of shoes tossed into a suitcase. It all played like the soundtrack of a collapsing life. Emily's face was pale, streaked with tears, but her jaw was set, her eyes unwavering. She did not move toward him, did not try to calm him. She only stood beside me, her shoulders trembling but her resolve firm. Minutes later, Mark reappeared, lugging 2 overstuffed bags. Glitter clung to him still, shining defiantly under the hallway light. He paused, looking at Emily with something between desperation and hatred. "You'll regret this," he said flatly. "You think you're stronger without me, but you're nothing on your own." Emily's chin lifted. Her voice cracked but did not falter. "I was strong long before you. Now get out." Mark's glare shifted to me, his eyes burning with resentment. "This is your fault, old man. You ruined everything." I met his stare calmly. "No, Mark. You ruined everything when you decided betrayal was easier than honesty." He sneered, then turned and stomped down the stairs, his suitcase wheels rattling against each step. We heard him cross the living room, then the slam of the front door. Silence fell, broken only by the distant sound of his car engine starting and fading into the night. Emily let out a long, shuddering breath, and for the first time in hours, I saw her shoulders sag. She stumbled into the chair beside my bed, covering her face with her hands. "Dad," she whispered through sobs, "I am so sorry. I brought him here. I put you in danger." I lowered myself into the chair beside her, resting a hand on her trembling shoulder. "Sweetheart, you couldn't have known. He fooled you just like he tried to fool me. None of this is your fault." Her tear-filled eyes met mine. "But how long have you suspected?" "Since that night I heard his phone call," I admitted softly. "I knew I had to protect us both." A weak smile flickered across her lips, breaking through the tears. "The glitter bomb. I can't believe you did that." I chuckled quietly, shaking my head. "I wanted him caught red-handed. Or should I say, glitter-handed." That earned me a laugh from her, genuine and raw, even as fresh tears streamed down her face. It was the sound of a heart breaking and healing at the same time. For the next few days, Emily barely left the house. She cried, she raged. She sat in silence for long stretches, staring at the walls as though replaying every moment of her marriage. I did not push her. I simply stayed nearby, cooking meals, offering quiet comfort when she needed it, and letting her grieve when she needed to. Gradually, though, something shifted. Her tears became less frequent. Her laughter returned, small at first, then stronger. She called a lawyer. She began making lists of tasks. Bank accounts to untangle, bills to separate, papers to file. Piece by piece, she began to reclaim her life. The divorce process was painful but straightforward. Mark tried to posture, tried to threaten about taking half of everything. But the reality of his gambling debts silenced him quickly. With creditors breathing down his neck and no assets of his own, he had nothing left to fight with. Emily's lawyer cut through his bluster, and within 3 months, the marriage was legally over. He disappeared into the mess of his own making, and we never heard from him again. 3 months after, that night, I stood in the kitchen making coffee when Emily came downstairs dressed in neat slacks and a pressed blouse. She looked different, calmer, steadier, her smile no longer forced. She had found a job at the community college library and was thriving there. "Morning, Dad," she said cheerfully, pouring herself coffee. "Morning, sweetheart," I replied. "Sleep well?" "Like a baby," she said with a grin. She settled at the table with her mug. "Big day today? Story hour at 10, then helping one of the professors with research. I love it there. It feels peaceful." I smiled at her, pride swelling in my chest. "You deserve peaceful." She sipped her coffee, then tilted her head. "Any regrets about the great glitter trap of March?" I laughed softly, shaking my head. "Only that I didn't get a picture of his face when it exploded." That earned another laugh from her, full and genuine this time. The sound filled the kitchen, replacing the heaviness that had once hung there. Later that morning, after she left for work, I sat at the table with my coffee, watching the sunlight spill across the kitchen floor. The house felt quiet again, but not the lonely quiet of before. It was the peaceful quiet of a home reclaimed. There were no lies hanging in the air, no footsteps creeping in the dark, no glitter trailing down the hall as evidence of betrayal. Just stillness, safety, and the warmth of knowing my daughter was healing. My phone buzzed with a text. "Emily, forgot to tell you. Mrs. Whitaker asked if you could help her install a security camera. Apparently word has gotten around about your unique home defense methods." I laughed out loud, setting my mug down. Maybe I had stumbled onto something after all. A glitter bomb might not be the standard for home security, but sometimes justice doesn't need to be standard. Sometimes justice needs to sting. Sometimes justice needs to shine so brightly that no one can deny it. I leaned back in my chair, letting the sunlight warm my face, and thought about everything that had happened. Mark had believed I was nothing more than a frail old man, easy to fool and easy to rob. He had thought betrayal could be hidden, that lies could protect him. But he was wrong. He had underestimated me, underestimated the power of patience, of observation, of quiet planning. In the end, he had not just been caught. He had been exposed, humiliated, undone by his own arrogance and a handful of glitter. Sometimes justice comes from courtrooms and police reports. Sometimes it comes from paperwork and lawyers. But sometimes, when the betrayal cuts too close to home, justice comes from trusting your instincts, setting a careful trap, and letting someone reveal their true nature in a way no one can deny. And sometimes, justice sparkles. If you liked this story, subscribe and share your thoughts in the comments. What would you have done if your daughter's husband tried to rob you under your own roof? To hear the next story, click on the box on your screen.